Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good morning to everyone. I hope all of you are doing absolutely fine. I welcome you all to today's session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis, where we will be taking up the most important topics from today's Hindu newspaper and discuss them in detail from both the mains and the prelims examination point of view. Reminding you once again, at the end of each of these sessions, we give you a couple of practice questions. A lot of you do try and write answers to those, but still there are a lot of you out there who are still not taking up these questions for your answer writing practice. Please don't do that. Make sure that you at least try and write certain answers. There is a link to our student answer writing portal that you will find in the description of the video. You can submit your answers there and you can give each other feedback as well. Now, having said that, these are the important topics that we have taken up for today's discussion. The first topic that was the biggest news that came out yesterday was the Supreme Court judgment on the question of whether same-sex marriage should be legalized or not. Then there are topics such as why should we have centralized procurement in our health sector in India? Why is it a good idea? Then there is an article on the amended version of the Wildlife Protection Act. As per the authors, the amended version is not great because the number of animal species in the first schedule have increased so much that now the protection that they deserve might not be adequately given. Then we also have an article about how our progress on sustainable development goals has not been up to the mark, and maybe the reason behind that is that the different departments and different ministries are not working together. From the prelims exam point of view, a couple of news. First, as per an RTI, that is right to information, passed, or in fact that was filed by the Hindu newspaper, they found out that Meiteis had earlier also demanded getting into the scheduled tribe list, and this was considered twice, and both these times this demand was rejected. This is a news that was not made public by the government either in Manipur or the central government, but it is a Hindu newspaper investigation that has brought out this news. And then yesterday, we saw the President of India giving away the National Film Awards. These were announced much earlier, but it was given yesterday, so we'll have a few details about that as well. Let's begin with the very first topic. Now, the biggest news that was in the papers and all around the media yesterday was that the Supreme Court finally gave a verdict on whether same-sex marriage would be legalized in India or not. In simple terms, the headline tells you, the Supreme Court says that we cannot legalize same-sex marriage in India. Let me tell you a bit of brief background about what this issue is. So in India, we have a law called the Special Marriage Act of 1954. Now, let's understand the idea. When you are married to a person, let's say you are marrying into your own religion, then there is not really an issue because both the people belong to the same religion, would have the same kind of ideas, would have the same way of living life. However, when two people of different religions, they get into a marriage, then the problem is which religious law, which personal law will recognize that marriage. Provided that both of these, none of them want to change their religion, none of these people, the husband or the wife, want to get into the other person's religion. Then how do you have a marriage that takes place between two different religions? What are the laws that will govern? For that, in 1954, there was a law passed called the Special Marriage Act, under which people belong to different religions can also marry. Now, the problem is, as per the petitioners who wanted same-sex marriage to be legalized, they had argued in the Supreme Court that the Special Marriage Act should also allow marrying of same-sex couple. That was a demand that was made by the petitioners from the LGBTQI community, that even same-sex marriage couples should be allowed to legally marry as per the Special Marriage Act. Now, this was a 5-judge bench that gave the verdict. The interesting part is, 3 judges were on the side that no, we cannot legalize same-sex marriage, while 2 judges were on the other side saying that same-sex marriage should be legalized. The interesting part is the 2 judges that were in the minority view also included the Chief Justice of India. That also shows you that the Chief Justice of India, while being a part of the bench, does not have any special powers over the other judges. It will always be a majority view that will win. So even if the Chief Justice of India is towards the minority side, it is the majority side that will win. Now, there were a lot of arguments given in this case. For example, the first argument or the first question was, petitioners argued that right to marriage is a fundamental right. That was the argument by the petitioners, that it's a fundamental right and we should be allowed to marry whoever we want, irrespective of the gender as well. The interesting part is, although Chief Justice of India agreed to this view, Chief Justice of India said that yes, I do agree with this, but the majority view of the judges, that is 3 judges, said that no, right to marriage is not a fundamental right, it's a statutory right. And thus you cannot demand that you have the freedom to marry anyone irrespective of gender as well. There was also a question asked whether the Supreme Court can allow same-sex couples to have a civil union status. Now, in India, we do not really have this concept of civil union, but civil union is a concept that is followed in many countries around the world. Civil union basically means 2 people coming into a relationship, living together. They are given most of the rights that married couples are, but they are not recognized as married couples as per the personal laws. So when there is a couple that is recognized as a civil union, they may get the right even to have to adopt a child. They may get rights for inheritance of property, of assets, etc. But even that right has been denied. The minority view of the judges, as I said that you can enter into a married relationship irrespective of the gender that you have. In fact, Chief Justice of India was of the view that discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation is a violation of Article number 15. But even then, the 3 other judges did not agree to that. The 3 judges said that no, this is not correct. The other part is, see, let's not interpret that judgment as the Supreme Court saying that same-sex marriage cannot be allowed or should not be allowed. No. What the Supreme Court essentially said was, this is the job of the Parliament to decide. They did not say the Parliament should not do that. They did not say that in India it is not allowed or India should not have this idea. The bottom line of the judgment is that the Supreme Court says that we will not decide on this matter. It is not within our scope of powers to say that this should be legal, this should be illegal with respect to this idea. If the petitioners really want that they should be given the right to have a legal same-sex marriage, it is a Parliament that should decide on this matter by passing an adequate law. So the ball is in the court of the Parliament. It's not that it has been criminalized. It's not that it is not something that can be taken up in the future. The Supreme Court says that we cannot do this right now. Maybe ask the Parliament, maybe they can go ahead with this idea. But the Supreme Court, at least for now, says that we will not have any verdict on this whether same-sex marriage should be allowed or not. Secondly, the Supreme Court again reiterated that our judgment does not mean that there should be discrimination on other fronts when it comes to people who belong to the LGBTQI community. The Supreme Court very clearly stated that we understand the fact that in society, these people belonging to the LGBTQI community have been facing discrimination for many, many decades now. In fact, the Supreme Court directed the government of India to make sure that they do not face any discrimination in any sphere of life. In fact, the Chief Justice of India asked the government to make a high-powered committee that should be presided over by a union cabinet committee to look into any areas where LGBTQI community face discrimination. They should not be discriminated against, or they should not be harassed by anyone for different reasons. For example, the Supreme Court Chief Justice said that the committee should look into whether the queer couples, without getting into marriage, should be allowed or could be allowed to have a joint account. Can they be considered in the same family for the purpose of a ration card? Can they also be or have the right to arrange for the last rites of their partners? So the Supreme Court again did not say that this idea should not be allowed. In fact, it has given a kind of a push to the government that you do some things from your end, you take the initiative, you are the ones that is the responsible party for bringing a law into the country, and you should decide whether such a law should be allowed or not in the country, rather than the Supreme Court deciding it. Now the interesting part is, usually you will not see Supreme Court doing this. We read about judicial activism, we read about how Supreme Court over the past few decades has been taking up a lot of matters into their own hand, has been deciding things on a lot of matters, even though they seem to be outside the scope of the Supreme Court. This comes as an exception to that case where the Supreme Court says that we should not decide. Let the legislature, let the parliament take a call on this matter. Now, the concept of civil union, as we discussed earlier, it's kind of marriage but not exactly marriage. It's a right that is given to the couples that yes, they have the right to get, let's say, adopt a child, to live together, to get most of the effects of the government schemes also, but without being recognized under the personal laws as marriage. In India, we do not have this concept as such. We recognize marriage and not any other union of this kind. The Special Marriage Act of 1954, that has been at the center of this entire debate, was initiated to ensure that if there are couples from different religion who want to get married, who do not want to change their religion, how will their marriage be recognized under any of the personal law? For this purpose, we had the Special Marriage Act. It talks about registration, solemnization of marriage. It also talks about how individuals can take their own way of life, or they can be free from their any religious compulsions. They don't have to change their religion just to get married to a person of some other religion. This is an act under which a lot of people marry. In fact, the interesting part is, it's not that this particular act only says that only people of two different religions can get registered under this act. Interestingly, some people where couples belong to the same religion, even they get registered under this act. Why? Because, for example, let's say there is a couple, both of them belonging to the same religion. They don't like their personal laws. For example, let's say their personal laws says that their property cannot be inherited by their daughter. It will be inherited by someone else. So what the couples do is, rather than getting married under their own religious law, the couple of the same religion can also get married under the Special Marriage Act, because they want to give these rights to their daughters. They want to give these rights to anyone that they want, rather than going ahead and following what their personal law says. So Special Marriage Act is open to people who belong to the same religion as well. Now, on this topic of same-sex marriage in India, on the topic of homosexuality, there are a lot of data points and research that have come out. As you know, Section 377 has been struck down, it has been decriminalized some years back, but even then, even after homosexuality was decriminalized in India, we still have a lot of cases being registered under this act. Another very interesting part that came out from this case was the Supreme Court, and all these judges, by the way, all 5 judges said that we should not think that same-sex marriage is just an urban elitist idea. This was a petition given by a lot of people, that same-sex marriage or homosexuality is just an urban idea, an elitist idea, and it does not really occur in rural areas or in tier 3, tier 4 cities. But that is not true. All 5 judges on the bench said that we should not consider homosexuality or same-sex marriage as an idea that exists or a demand that exists only in the metro cities or only in urban elitist areas. In fact, as per the National Crime Record Bureau, we have seen 82% cases that were registered under Section 377 when it was not decriminalized were outside the metro cities. These cases have continued to be registered even after this section was decriminalized. This was struck down in the year 2018. Even then, as you can see here, the number of cases have consistently remained above 1,000, which is a direct contradiction of the Supreme Court judgment that decriminalizes homosexuality. The other side of the story is that most of the Indians, although on paper, out in the public, they might not support the idea of same-sex marriage. A lot of Indians might feel hesitant to support this idea, but the reality is, if you look at this survey, a lot of Indians, 17% of it, have accepted to being attracted towards the same sex. This again proves that this idea of same-sex marriage may not see a lot of support in the public all at once, but that does not really mean that people in India in general don't support this idea. Just that they may be too hesitant to come out because of societal pressure, because of their family pressure. But these numbers show that there have been a lot of Indians who would support this idea once it gets legalized out there in the open. Then it's time for the second article of the day. The second article of the day is based on the concept of centralized procurement. Now, what is the idea of centralized procurement? In this article, it has been explained with an example of McDonald's. So let's take the same example to understand. Or you can take an example of any franchisee, whichever you like, McDonald's, Domino's, KFC, whichever you prefer. So for example, if there's a restaurant that has, or there's a restaurant chain that has 1,000 restaurants across the country. Let's assume McDonald's has 1,000 restaurants in India. At all of those places, they sell French fries. So now the question is, the potatoes that they buy from the farmers to make French fries, are all the individual restaurants of McDonald's buying these potatoes separately? Or is it a better idea that at a centralized place, that is at the head office, McDonald's itself will make a deal from the farmers to buy tons and tons of potatoes and then they supply to the individual restaurants? Which is a better way forward? How can they get a better price? How can they maintain a better quality? It's a simple question. The answer is obviously when you have centralized procurement, when you are not allowing different restaurants to procure different potatoes at different price points, it is only then that you can ensure that we have a good quality and price that is maintained all throughout. If this idea is implemented by a restaurant chain, why can it not be implemented by the government, especially in the healthcare sector? That is the argument given here by the authors. The government of India runs a lot of health programs. In all of these programs, the government has to procure a lot of medicines. The government has to distribute medicines. Not just this, the government runs thousands of hospitals across the country. In all these hospitals, you have to have medicines. You distribute these medicines to your patients. In the present system, what happens is all these individual government hospitals are individually buying medicine from the companies. So one government hospital will make a deal with another company. Second government hospital will make some other deal. Now, when you individually go ahead and make a deal, what happens is you will never get the best price because your power to negotiate will not be very high. So the author here is saying that if we have to make our healthcare more affordable, if we have to bring down the prices for the government itself, especially for procuring these many medicines, equipments, it's always a better idea to have centralized procurement. Inviting all these companies to come in, fill in the tender. Whichever company agrees to sell the medicines at the lowest price possible, the government should just buy from them. And that's how the government can save tons and tons of money. Because the government runs multiple such programs. For example, we have the central government health scheme. We have the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. We have the employee state insurance scheme. We have government hospitals, etc. All of them require these medicines which are procured individually. You can take an example from the private sector. In the private sector, there are so many hospital chains that you see around the country. In North India, there are some other hospital chains. In South India, you might see some other hospital chains. For example, at the top of my mind, Apollo comes. So Apollo, for example, has a lot of hospitals, have a lot of medical stores across the entire country. So what they do, rather than having individual hospitals procure medicines, they strike a deal, an individual deal with the company to supply them medicine and they get it at the best possible price. Why can't the government also do the same? The interesting part is the government has done the same in certain cases. For example, we have a National Cancer Grid Pooled Procurement Initiative India. That was a recent paper that was published in which it was shown that the government of India runs something called the National Cancer Grid Program for 40 drugs. This National Grid Program for 40 drugs, under which the government of India procures the drugs, basically it resulted in the saving of 13.2 billion rupees when they pooled their procurement when they procured all of these drugs from same company and then distributed it to the different hospitals. It led to savings of 23 to 99% in certain cases. That is the amount of difference that you can have just by procuring it at one single place, having centralized procurement. The government knows the benefits through the other initiatives of the government as well. I'll give you one more example. So the government has National AIDS Control Organization. In the National AIDS Control Organization, what the government does, government buys a lot of male contraceptives. Now, how does a government buy this? There is a government company called HLL Life Care. What this HLL Life Care does is, they actually try to make sure that they procure all these drugs. They are the ones that give the price. HLL company gives a price to the government that yes, this is the price at which we should be willing to buy. The private sector is then asked to match that price. If the private companies are able to match the price of HLL, then the government of India buys from these companies. That is how all these things happen. This is where the government of India can adopt a similar model to the other areas as well. Let's for example, say the government of India has to procure a certain medicine. First, ask the cost of that medicine from a government company. Ask the government manufacturer that what should be the ideal cost of this medicine. Then the private sector should be asked, can you match this cost or not? If the private sector is able to match this cost, the government should procure from them. That is how the government of India can save a lot of money when it comes to procuring all these things. That becomes a very, very advantageous proposition. And the government has done this in this case. The same model can be done for other drug procurement as well. Have a standard price set up through a government agency or through a government manufacturer. Ask the private sector to match up to that price. If they can, great, the government should buy from there itself. All of these are advantages that you get through centralized procurement. Now, I'll give you two very interesting examples so that you can understand this idea even better. We have been talking about how centralized procurement, the government buying in bulk can have an advantage. I'll give you an opposite example. Let's take an example of centralized selling rather than centralized buying. You all would have heard of OPEC, right? Now, OPEC is a group of major oil producing nations. So what they did was, they formed a cartel. All the oil producing nations, 1970s, thought, let's come together, make a group, because we have something that the entire world needs. We have oil. So why not all of us decide a higher price so that no one can get oil at a cheaper price, and then we will be able to earn a lot more profit. So they together made this cartel to bump up the price of oil. That's a proper example of how centralized selling or a cartelized selling can have an advantage for the sellers. Similarly, apply the same example to our side now. When you are buying this, why can't we also, that is the government also, act as one single buyer, that we are the only buyers that you have and we'll buy in bulk. If you really want to sell us, then you will have to sell it at a lower price. So this concept works at both the ends, when you are selling or when you are buying. I'll give you one more example. Now, OPEC is a successful example of this. I'll give you another example which has not really come into reality. Example of SAARC. Now, South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation. There have been demands that SAARC should act together as one single group while buying oil or while buying other resources from the world. Because SAARC has some of the most populous countries in the world. All of us import a lot of oil. Why not have a centralized procurement so that we can ask for a better price? But we have not done that. Why? Because it's very, very difficult for all these nations to come together, act as one. But at least within the country, in our healthcare system, we can do that. So centralized procurement will always have these advantages of much lower cost. We will be able to ensure quality as well. We will be able to ensure better prices. We will be able to ensure the ease of supply chain. We will not have trouble where one hospital is getting the medicine on time, other hospitals are not getting the medicine on time. All of these issues will be solved if we go ahead with centralized procurement or centralized purchasing system. That was the second article about the idea of centralized procurement. Let's move on to the third one. The third article today is based on the revised version of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. I am sure all of you have read about the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972 at some point of time. This act originally was formed so that we can have enough protection given to species that are endangered. So it originally had multiple schedules. Animals that were in schedule number 1 were given the most protection by the government. If you harm any of those animals, you will be given a very strict punishment. Then there was schedule 2 animals, schedule 2 again protected by the government. But if you harm them or kill them, your punishment will be slightly lower. Then similarly, there was schedule 3, schedule 4, schedule 5, schedule 6, etc. What has happened is the government of India has made changes in this act, especially to bring it in line with the CITES Convention. Now, a couple of things here are important. First, what is the CITES Convention? And secondly, what are the changes made in the Wildlife Protection Act? First, let's talk about the CITES Convention. CITES Convention mainly tries to restrict international trade of animal species that harms them. It doesn't say that international trade of animals is not allowed. It just says that when you are trading in animals internationally, some animal species goes from one country to the other country, there should be proper precautions held in place. There should be proper information that should be given. If it harms any animal species, then that kind of trade should not be allowed. Those are the kind of things that CITES says. India is also a member of it. So now what we have done is we have made changes in the Wildlife Protection Act to bring it more in line with CITES. The one big change is we earlier used to have 6 schedules. That has now been changed to 4 schedules. So now the Wildlife Protection Act has 4 schedules instead of 6. The biggest change because of this that has happened is number of animals in Schedule 1 specifically have increased considerably. The number of animals in Schedule 1 now, which gives the highest protection, are very, very high now. Similarly, number of animals in Schedule 2 again are very high. And this is what the environmentalists are unhappy about. The environmentalists are saying that if you have so many animals in Schedule 1, and then you say we will give highest level of protection to all those animals, that means somewhere down the line you will not be able to fulfill your objective. How will you make sure that the budget given by the government is focusing on all these animals? If you have so many animals, then all the effort by the government will somewhere be compromised. The lesser the number of animals, the better it would be. The second idea is, in the earlier version of the Wildlife Protection Act, there was a concept of vermins. Vermins means those animals which were harming human life, which were harming human cultivation. They were allowed to be hunted. For example, let's say animals such as nilgai. So nilgai or such animals, when they were harming human cultivation, the state government could give an order that they are allowed to be hunted so that their population is reduced. In this version of the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, that has been taken away. That idea that you can kill or you can hunt down some animals when their population increases considerably, that idea has been taken away. So the problem that it creates is you are giving too much priority to conservation of animals, which is fine. But the problem is you are not giving priority to the human interest. You are neglecting the fact that the human interest, that the farmers, the agriculturists, whose vegetation is being harmed by the animals, what will they do? They have not been given any alternative. These are some of the problems that have come up with the Wildlife Protection Act. The Wildlife Protection Act aligns itself with the CITES agreement, but as I said, they have many more species now in Schedule 1 and Schedule 2. That has become a problem. Schedule 1 has over 1,000 species now. Schedule 2 again has about 2,000 species. The problem is even the animals that may not require such high level of protection, they have also been given a place in Schedule 1. For example, along with tigers, jackals also been given Schedule 1 status. Similarly, king cobra, rat snakes, barn owls, all of these have been given similar kind of protection, which is something that the authors do not agree to. Now, on paper, it might seem like a good idea. Who would object to the idea of giving protection to the animal species, right? Everyone would say it's a good idea. But the problem here is, again, when you make such kind of a law, it doesn't really give good impact. There's an example shared in this article about what happened in Kerala. In Kerala, there was a law passed called Tree Prevention Acts of Kerala. Now, what happened here? In this law, basically, the people were prohibited from cutting down certain species of trees. That no, you cannot cut them down because these native trees have to be given much more priority. They have to be given much more protection. So what happened? The government wanted to protect the native trees of that state. But instead of protecting them, what happened was the people of Kerala or Karnataka started giving preference to planting foreign trees rather than native trees so that they could cut foreign trees whenever they want. So from planting native trees, they in fact changed to planting trees such as silver oak, etc., which they can cut at any point of time. So your efforts towards conservation are appreciable, but when it comes at a cost of human welfare, when it comes at the cost of humans having to lose their income, you will see that the humans, obviously the citizens, will not be able to abide by it. And there are many other examples of what Wildlife Protection Act has done. For example, spotted deer is placed now in Schedule 1. These spotted deers are responsible for harming vegetation cultivation in many parts of the country. Now, because they are in Schedule 1, you will not be allowed to hunt them, you will not be allowed to harm them in any way possible. That creates a problem now. Do you expect that a common man, on seeing that a spotted deer is harming his or her cultivation, that will lead to loss of income? Do you expect that common man to still not do anything? Or do you expect the common man to take some action? If the common man does take some action, you will punish the common man, let's say with a fine or maybe with a jail term. That becomes a problem here, that the impact on the people has been ignored here. Because the people at the end of the day cannot have their livelihood compromised. And there are various other examples of impacts that this particular author gives. For example, they say that many Schedule 1 species have harmed the economic interests of the people. For example, crocodiles in Andamans, leopards in certain pockets of India, elephants at many places kill animals, destroy livelihood. There are again animals such as nilgai, wild pigs, even they are in Schedule 1. There was a time just a few years back when nilgai pigs were considered as vermins for some time so that they could be hunted, their population could be reduced. But now all of them has been taken out and their culling would be prohibited. Also, the Wildlife Protection Act doesn't really talk about hunting, does not really talk about what to do when the animal numbers increase beyond control. If the Act talks about preserving animals when their population dwindles, it should on the contrary also talk about what to do when their population becomes too high to be controlled. The third issue is that despite support of many individuals, the forest bureaucracy, that is the paperwork involved in getting permissions to change anything, would require a long time to implement any of the changes. That is why even when the people would require certain permission to reduce these animals and curtail the movement of these animals, you will see a lot of time being taken for such decisions to be finalized by the forest bureaucracy. All these are problems that have been pointed out by these authors here. This changed version of the Wildlife Protection Act has come into picture or has been implemented from April this year. So it is already in place now. However, there are still question marks asked over it. These are the new 4 schedules in place of the 6 schedules that we used to have earlier. First schedule, animal species that enjoy highest level of protection. Second schedule, those animal species that have a lesser degree of protection. Third schedule for protected plants and species. And fourth schedule, for scheduled specimen who are under sites, whose trade is restricted and whose trade will be overlooked by the CITES Convention. The Act also permits the use of animals for religious and other purposes. In fact, this phrase that says animal use for other purposes, that also has come under a lot of debate because it has not been explained enough. What are these other purposes? For religious purposes, fine, it is understandable. In many religious processions, you use animals such as elephants, but what are the other purposes? It has still not been clarified. The single biggest point about this amended act is that it is in line with the CITES Convention. This amended act also talks about having a standing committee to exercise powers and duties as delegated by the State Board for the Wildlife. It also talks about having a management authority for import and export, which is something that the CITES Convention really talks about, and this focuses on how to control the export of those animals that are endangered in the first place. This act also talks about having a scientific authority that will advise on the aspects of survival of these specimens who are being traded. So if there's an animal being traded from one country to the other country, for the government, there will be advice given by the scientific authority, and the government will act on that advice rather than depending upon their own decision. It also talks about creation of conservation reserve. It talks about managing alien invasive species, how to manage these. So alien invasive species, for example, means let's assume there's an animal species in India that does not exist. Somehow that animal species is imported from some other country and it becomes invasive. Invasive means it now starts to harm our own environment, it starts to harm our cultivation. Then how to manage those species? Do you kill them? Do you have some, or do you give some order to restrict their population? Do you export them back? How would you actually manage those species? That has also become a part of this law. This law also has increased the penalties. It used to be 25,000 earlier. Now the penalty is in the range of 1 lakh rupees for violation of the provisions of the amended version of the Wildlife Protection Act. Then we move on to the next article. The next article here is about the Sustainable Development Goals. As you all would be aware of, 17 Sustainable Development Goals, where the nations are trying to achieve them by 2030. For those who don't know what these are, let me just show this to you and then we'll come back. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. No poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, reduce inequality, etc. These are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the nations are trying to achieve by 2030. Now this article says there are a lot of stumbling blocks because of which nations around the world, including India, are not on track to achieve their Sustainable Development Goals. The author says it is mainly because of how the synergies are not really combining together. Now, what do you mean by synergy? Synergy basically means working together or combining your energies. Let's explain this in simpler words. For example, what they are saying is, in order for the entire country to achieve their goal, let's say goal of renewable energy production or the goal of net zero target, what is happening is that the departments of the government, the ministries of the government are not working together as much as they should. Because all of them are individually trying to achieve whatever they can, we are not seeing an overall impact as much as we should. That is the problem, which is why most of the countries, including India, are not on track to achieve their Sustainable Development Goals. Recently, we had the Sustainable Development Goals Summit in New York about a month back, where the world leaders repeated the fact that we are not on track to achieve these goals. We are on track to meet only 15% of the 169 targets. So there are total 17 goals as I showed you. Within those goals also there are individual targets of how much percentage increase or decrease we should see. So there are total of 169 targets in total. Out of that, we are on track to achieve only 15% of this target. In fact, the money that is required to achieve this target, even that funding has been reducing considerably. This year, the UN Conference on Trade and Development said that the investment gap that is required in developing countries is more than $4 trillion. For example, when you expect a country to focus more on improving the environment, to focus more on reducing poverty, they require funding for all these purposes. And this is where the gap starts. The developing countries expect the developed world to help them with the funding, but that's just not happening. The developed world says that the developing world should cut their cost and they should not misuse the money in terms of subsidy, etc. They should rather use money for attaining sustainable development goals. This becomes a problem here. So there's lack of synergy, not just within the country between different ministries and departments. There is even lack of synergy amongst the nations together. Not every nation is coming forward to help the other nation achieving their goals, because every nation is rather putting the blame on the other ones that you are not doing enough rather than asking for help from us. As per the international expert, there are 5 main lack of synergies that we are seeing around the world. First, synergy from resource allocation. Some countries have enough resources, some other countries don't. Creation of enabling environment. Some countries have been able to set up such an environment where the countries are working towards achieving these goals. Other countries have not been able to set up such an environment. Co-benefits. Some countries are getting much more benefits out of it as compared to others. Cost effectiveness is not the same. And saturation limit. So not every country has a potential to go ahead and look over and turn towards renewable energy. I'll give you a simple example. India right now is in that state, luckily, where we can focus a lot on solar energy. But think about some other countries which do not have that solar potential. Some of the other countries which do not have enough sunlight, which do not have enough resources to build these solar panels. Obviously, our approach or our limit of producing renewable energy will be very different as compared to some other countries. Similarly, countries, let's say UK, Scotland, they have a lot of wind potential. France, they have a lot of potential for generating wind energy. In India, the potential is good, but it's not that high as compared to UK, France. In some other countries, the potential is even lower. So the saturation limit also will be very, very different for different countries, and that is why setting a target that is the same for everyone will not be possible. Now, within the country, within India as well, although we are trying to achieve this target, India is one of those countries which is in fact on its way to achieve the target that we have set in the Paris Climate Summit in 2015. Even then, within the country, we still have certain issues. For example, energy departments in India have set a target of, let's say, some gigawatts of power generation that should be in renewable energy form. So they don't really give enough attention to small little departments which are consuming energy only in kilowatts. For example, if you have a target that you have to achieve 100 crore rupees in sale. Now, if you have a customer that says, I want to buy 10,000 rupees of product, you will ignore that customer, right? Your target is 100 crore in sales. You will look for a customer that's ready to buy 10 crore, 15 crore. Any customer that is ready to buy 15, 20,000 is not really worth your time, and you will ignore that. Similar is happening here as well. The Government of India Energy Department is looking to have gigawatts worth of energy being consumed and being made in renewable energy. But similar small department like health centers, etc., hospitals, etc., that only need certain kilowatts of energy and not a very large amount, they are being ignored in large numbers. That is why the overall target may not be achieved in the long run. We have to be more careful that the overall goal will be achieved only when we fulfill the targets at the small level itself. Now, what is India doing and what are we supposed to do to achieve our net zero? As you know, the Government of India has targeted 2070 as our net zero target. We are investing a lot more money into renewable energy, mainly solar, nuclear, etc. Solar energy production of India has increased drastically. We have been working a lot on hydropower generation as well. But even then, 2070 net zero goal is a far, far, far long way away. We have to focus on other aspects as well. For example, using clean energy option for urban transport. Urban transport remains a big producer of pollution in India. We have to focus on how to reduce air pollution, how to increase human wealth. For all of that, the government must focus on those aspects of life that are impacting an individual's way of life day in and day out. It may be urban transportation, it may be having clean energy in terms of how energy is supplied to your household, it can be clean energy in just your general way of life. All of these are important. How is India doing, by the way, in terms of sustainable development goals? Not that great. For example, this is India's progress report. This green signal basically says that we are on track to maintaining this. Green means we are on track. Then we have this yellow, that means we are improving at a very slight pace. Red part means we are actually decreasing or declining. So if you see, out of all these 17 goals, we are on track to achieving no poverty and responsible consumption and production. While there are some other targets where we are lagging behind and rather we are actually declining. For example, reduced inequality, so means inequality in India is increasing. Life on land, so that quality is also decreasing. Then there are some other areas where we have not been making a lot of improvement, such as climate action, such as sustainable cities and communities, such as peace, justice, strong institutions, such as zero hunger. All these are places where we need to work much harder as compared to where we stand right now. Again, the progress report that I've taken from the website itself of the Sustainable Development Goals also shows this data about India. Where are we improving? Where do we have much more scope to improve? And where is it that our growth has become much more stagnant? Some of the good pointers are municipal solid waste, improving. Participation rate in pre-primary organized learning, it's improving. Population with access to electricity, that is also improving. So there are some aspects which we see India is improving in. Maternal mortality rate, again, something that is something to cheer about with respect to where we stand right now. Now we move on to a couple of news stories from the prelims examination point of view. The first one is about the scheduled tribe status for the Meiteis. Again, this was a topic that started all these violent activities in Manipur that we have been seeing till today itself. The Meitei community, that is in majority in Manipur, that lives usually in the plain areas, they have also demanded that just like the Kukis, they also deserve to be in the scheduled tribe and thus get reservation benefits. It was their demand and the Manipur High Court asking the central government to take up this matter that led to this large-scale violence starting in Manipur. Now, this news article says that the Hindu newspaper had filed an RTI to know about whether in the past also the Meiteis have made such demands. And the record shows that yes, this was the case. In fact, not just once, twice in 1982 and 2001, there were demands made for scheduled tribe status of the Meiteis, but it was not accepted. In 1982, the Ministry of Home Affairs asked the Office of Registrar General to look into this demand, but the Office of the Registrar General said that no, they don't require any scheduled tribe status benefits right now. They said that they do not appear to possess any tribal characters and they usually have non-tribal population. 20 years later, in 2001, Ministry of Social Justice at that time in the central government was revising the scheduled tribe list in states and union territories. They had again asked Manipur government for their recommendation, but that time in 2001, the Manipur government itself denied that Meiteis don't require any reservation benefits. Manipur government said that they are dominant group in Manipur. Meiteis are mainly Hindus and assumed the status of the Kshatriya caste in the Hindu caste system, and thus they do not require any benefits that are given to those castes which are considered backward or which are considered weaker. Thus, the interesting part, which this is the information which has not been made public so far by the government, but again, this proves that the Meitei community and their demand to get into scheduled tribes is not a new demand. It has existed for close to 40 years now, since 1982. Now, one of the problems of how the scheduled tribe status is decided in India is that it is based on a very old criteria. It is based on the criteria set in 1965 by the Lokur committee. they had said that for any tribe to be included in the scheduled tribe list, you would look into, do they have any primitive traits? Do they have a distinctive culture? Do they have, or are they geographically isolated? Are they shy in contact with the community at large? Are they backward or not? The same criteria is used even today. Based on the same criteria, the Registrar General of India gives their opinion, and then the Parliament basically decides whether or not they want to amend the constitution in order to include them in the scheduled tribe list or not. There has not been any change since then, although there have been multiple committees that have been formed since then. Before giving you examples of those committees, if you look at the status of scheduled tribe in India, the scheduled tribes are not properly defined in the constitution. There is no proper definition of scheduled tribe in the constitution as such. The one definition that was given was back in 1931. In 1931 census, scheduled tribes were termed as backward tribes living in excluded and partially excluded areas. It was in Government of India Act of 1935 that representative of backward tribes were given a place in the provincial assemblies. In our constitution, while we do have scheduled tribes being mentioned as beneficiaries of reservation, while the constitution also talks about how scheduled tribes will be listed, but again there is no proper definition of what will be a scheduled tribe and who will not be a scheduled tribe. Right now in India we have over 700 scheduled tribes, most of which are found in Odisha, and there are many other states where we do not have any scheduled tribe recognition. There are multiple committees formed on this topic of scheduled tribes and who are the scheduled tribes, how do they identify. The local committee, as we discussed, there was a Bhuria committee that talked about 5th scheduled tribal areas and forests and how to ensure development of people living in these areas. We also had the Zaza committee very recently in 2013 to study the issues related to tribal communities. But again, the committee on the basis of which the scheduled tribe are still listed is the local committee of 1965. The last news of the day is that the President of India conferred the National Film Awards yesterday. Again, the announcements of these awards are done way in advance. Yesterday was thus the function, the facilitation function, in which the President of India gave away these awards. Again, these awards were for the year 2021. Remember this. You can't remember all of them, but some of the most important highlights were the Dada Saheb Phalke Award, that is usually the Lifetime Achievement Award, was given to Bollywood actress Waheeda Rehman. We also had the famous film RRR that was given 6 different awards. Gangubai Kathiawadi got 5 different awards. Then there were other films that won for Best Movie. There were actor and actresses that won for their distinctive categories. You don't have to remember the entire list of it, but in the prelims examination, we do see nowadays a bit of details asked about the main award winners. So it would be advisable to at least try and remember about the main award winners who won in the night. A bit of detail about the National Film Awards. The National Film Awards are aimed at encouraging production of films of aesthetic and technical excellence and social relevance. This is an important point here. So whenever they give an award, they look into social relevance as well. They started in 1954 first. In the beginning, they were only for best films from a dozen regional languages. Then starting in 1968, they were given to artists and technicians as well. So now they are given to artists, technicians, best actress, supporting actor, best actress, etc. Earlier, it only started with the best movie award. There are a lot of different categories in which the awards are given. They are organized by the Directorate of Film Festivals. There is a jury that decides the winners. The jury is mainly formed by the Government of India. They are the ones who recommend who should be given these awards every single year. This brings us to the end of today's discussion. Here are a couple of practice questions right here for you. Make sure that you move over to our Telegram channel as soon as this session comes to an end to give a quiz based on the topics that we have discussed today. If you have still not joined our Telegram channel, the link for this is given in the description of the video. Thank you so much for watching this Hindu Newspaper Analysis. We'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the next edition. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.